Good morning, class. Today, in our food production lesson, we shall be looking at food commodities. Um, and the first thing we'll be looking at under food commodities, first we look at the learning outcomes. And what is expected by the end of this lesson is that the learner should be able to state the classification of proteins, list the sources of proteins, state factors to consider when selecting protein food, explain the preparation of protein foods, and outline the production method of protein dishes. Uh, so we'll start by looking at proteins. Uh, we have classification of proteins. We have animal proteins and plant proteins. Animal proteins have a high biological value, meaning that they contain a good balance of all the amino acids that we need. On the other hand, plant proteins have low biological value, which means that some plant proteins are low in certain amino acids that we need in our bodies. For example, methionine, tryptophan, among others. We can also say that the body is able to produce non-essential amino acids. However, it cannot produce essential amino acids, and that's why we need to obtain them through the diet. Next, we look at the sources of proteins. And number one, we look at animal proteins. One of the sources of animal proteins is red meat. By red meat, we are looking at beef, veal, mutton, lamb, pork, goat meat. We're looking at offal, which consists of the liver, kidney, sweetbreads, and we're also looking at game meat. And we can describe game meat as meat from non-domesticated, free-ranging, and farm-raised wild animals and birds that are either legally hunted for personal consumption or reared, slaughtered, and commercially sold for food. Examples are antelopes, deers, alligators, rabbits, and among the birds we have quail, wild turkey, ducks, among others. We also have white meat as a source of animal protein, which includes poultry. Among poultry, we have chicken, duck, geese, turkey, quails, and in white meat, we also have fish, which can be freshwater, salty water, or sea fish, shellfish also, among others. Next, we also look at another source of proteins, which are the plant proteins. First, we have pulses, which include beans, soybeans, peas, green grams, black beans. At this point, it is important to understand the difference between cereals and pulses because at times they may be mistaken. And so pulses contain a lot of protein, like the examples we have here, while cereals contain a lot of starch. For example, maize, sorghum, and others. Another source of plant protein are the nuts now. We have groundnuts, peanuts, cashew nuts, hazelnuts, and many others. These two are sources of proteins. So now there are factors that we must consider when we are selecting the protein foods as we buy. And for the first one we look at are the animal proteins. Number one, they must be fresh. For example, when you get meat from the butchery, it should not have any unpleasant odor, and the fluid on it should be watery and not sticky. Then it can also be shown by the color. For example, beef should be bright red. Also, it is important that when you go to buy, it's good to buy from a clean and well ventilated shop that gives you an assurance of the safety of that particular protein. Uh, So animal protein also should not have excessive fat and bone, and its texture should be firm and elastic. And also something else to consider is the dish you want to prepare. For example, you can be wanting to boil or you want to prepare it as a steak. Depending on which dish, that it will tell you what kind of animal protein or the factors you can consider while buying. The method of cooking too should be considered when selecting. So the other thing we look at is what to consider when buying plant proteins. Number one, when you're buying plant proteins, they need to be clean and free from soil and stones. Number two, you must check them for signs of pests or any diseases. And also, the plant proteins should be well shaped and firm and not damaged by the harvesting equipment or even the weather. Another thing you can look at is the time for preparation that is available. Some may take too long to get ready, yet you need your meal to get ready earlier. So it is also a factor to consider when purchasing. And also, how available is it? Because most of the time, when you need to get something that is not readily available, it ends up getting expensive. Another thing to consider is season. It's always good to take advantage of seasonal foods because they come from nearby, and when they're in season, they are also very much affordable. Another thing we shall look at now is the preparation of protein foods. What do we do to these dishes before they are cooked? One of them can be trimming, which means cutting off the excess fat. There is cutting or portioning. There is deboning, which means just taking off the bones. There is marinating for the sake of flavor. We also have larding, which means inserting or wrapping strips of fat or bacon on meat before cooking. There is also trussing, mainly for chicken and other birds, where we tie the wings and the legs uh, just so as to keep them in shape so that it does not lose shape, especially when we are grilling or putting in the oven. Another one is singeing. This is when you burn the bristles off the carcass of especially chicken here in Kenya so that it is ready for cooking. To continue with the preparation, we have sealing, we have budding, which means that you cover or wrap meat with some fat bacon before cooking. Another one is carving. Also, we tenderize because sometimes the meat is tough, it needs to be tenderized. And now, also for the sake of plant proteins, we need to salt and also soak. Now we go to the production method of protein dishes. How can we cook protein dishes? Number one, we can boil, we can stew, we can roast, we can grill, also frying, braising. We also have poaching and steaming, but these are particularly most of the time for fish. Lastly, we have the suggested protein dishes. For plant proteins, mainly we can have curries, stews, and goulash. And for the animal proteins, we also have curries, we also have stews, but now we also have goulash, roasts, and grills, among others. So for today, this is what we learn, and looking forward to see you in the next lesson. Thank you and goodbye.